Hi, I'm Sade, and today we are talking about Dread Nation by Justina Ireland. It is a YA book that taps into the Black horror renaissance that we've been seeing with things like Get Out and Lovecraft Country and Antebellum, where you've got your Black leads and they are not only fighting monsters but also the horror of white supremacy, and either of these things could take them down. It is about a young woman called Jane McKeene who is born 2 days after the dead start to walk the battlefields of Gettysburg. So it happens after the American Civil War and during Reconstruction, and during a policy where the government has told indigenous families and Black families that they must send their children to combat schools where they are taught how to kill the zombies. Jane is sent to Miss Preston's School of Combat, where she is being trained to be an attendant for well-to-do families. And while she's there, she gets caught up in this conspiracy between different factions of the white ruling class who have different ideas on how to win this battle against the undead. The writing is incredibly rich. You can feel the heat of the sun in the south. You can smell the scent of the dead rotting even as they rise again. You can feel the sense of fear in the air because they're basically losing this battle against the undead, and the communities that they live in, the land available to them, is getting smaller and smaller as the dead encroach. The pace is breakneck speed, there is peril at every turn, and it is really non-stop. Justina's also very clever in the way that she mixes history with fiction. It's set in a historical period, but she utilizes a lot of the techniques that white supremacy is used in order to exploit the talents and the labor of minority groups for the most dangerous, the most difficult, but the most needful work without recognition and without compensation. And that's what's happening to the young people that are put into these combat schools. The parallels with the world that we live in are very stark. If I think about growing up in the UK, we learned about the First and Second World War, and there was a memorial every year to remember the armistice. And I didn't know until I was an adult that African, West Indian and Asian soldiers had also fought in these wars because it was very whitewashed. 2.5 million Indians fought in the Second World War, 1 million African soldiers, and 16,000 soldiers from the British West Indies. Yet they're just written out of history. So it's the kind of thing that you can imagine that the people in this battle against the undead on the front lines are people of color, but they are the people who are least recognized and who will be written out of the history. And it's also fascinating in that Jane is very talented, and she's bold, and she's daring, she's very skilled in her fighting skills and very strategic. If they were actually willing to recognize her abilities, she'd be the kind of person who could turn the tide in terms of how they can win this war. But of course the white people do not recognize any value in the people of color, so they overlook all your talents, and so people like Jane McKeene, who could be useful, are not utilized well at all, and therefore they are losing. So again, it's that one of the themes I think in this book is what people will sacrifice at the altar of their prejudice. These people would rather die in a stratified, unfair world than win against the undead in an equal society. And that's the kind of thing that we see time and time again. Brexit. We don't care if we are bankrupt as long as we make this statement about how we don't want immigrants in our country. So I think there's a lot of parallels between the real world and the fictional world that she has built. And I think the most interesting horror stories are the ones that say something profound about the world that we live in. So it's a really excellent story on just a number of levels. I recommended it. Well, I sent a copy to my friend's daughter who is 12 years old, and I was like, oh, is this pushing the boundaries a little bit? She might be slightly young for it because it does have some dark themes in there. There's quite a lot of violence, but it's also quite accessible. I would say it's comfortably good for ages 14 upwards. It's excellent for adults. It's a really gripping read. Look at this cover. She just looks so powerful on there, and she's such a great heroine. So I would really recommend this book. It's Dread Nation by Justina Ireland. Get your copy.